Hi, folks, and thanks for joining us here at SomeFuture for episode 10 of our podcast. We are your hosts, Jack and Chris.
Hey!
Today on Present Futures, we will be talking about two exciting stories on bringing back extinct species and a story on the future of meat production. On PaleoFutures, we will be talking about the greatest demo ever. And on FizBiz, we will be discussing automobile investing. And, as always, we will have a prominent futurist as our guest. We hope that you enjoy our show. Please visit our website and blog, where we'll be posting supporting materials at www.somefuture.org. Follow us on our Twitter handle at SomeFuture. And we always welcome your engagement with questions, concerns, or ideas of things you would like to hear about on our podcast by emailing us at somefuturepodcast@gmail.com.
That's SomeFuture.
For my present futures today, I wanted to talk about bringing back extinct species.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which ones?
Yeah, exactly. So we're in an exciting time of technology where the science fiction technologies of Jurassic Park are on the verge of actually becoming reality. Now, I say the technology behind Jurassic Park is on the verge of reality because, in truth, it was based off of a scientific study created by entomologist George Pointer from the University of California at Berkeley in the 1980s, where he and other scientists actually found some insects encased in amber that had some remnants of ancient species DNA within them. So after talking to Pointer, that's where Michael Crichton wrote his book, Jurassic Park. Now here's the interesting thing. So despite finding...
I'm not going to get eaten, right?
No.
When it comes to this?
That's a long ways off. So
okay, all right.
Despite finding the dinosaur DNA within the insects, it has since come to be known that DNA has a half-life of about 521 years, and that the older DNA gets, the harder it is to piece it back together. This means that anything older than 6.8 million years would effectively have no DNA left to collect. The oldest DNA found to date was from a 700,000-year-old horse in Canada, and the oldest human DNA was from a 400,000-year-old hominin found in Spain. So, like I said, the idea of bringing dinosaurs back to life is still a very long ways off. But many scientists actually still think it may be possible. But I'm going to take an aside for you for a second. And I'm going to say that, all dinosaurs aside, scientists are actually currently working on ways that would allow us to bring back animals that were made extinct within the time period of our earliest ancestors, which, is the evolution of Homo sapiens. Recently, National Geographic asked the question, since we are on the verge of developing technologies, artificial insemination, gene manipulation, DNA discoveries like CRISPR, if we can bring back extinct species, should we? And if so, which ones? So, Chris, I'm going to bring you in here. What species, if you think of any, you think that we should bring back? If we do, and is it ethical to do so?
I mean, what do we know about the species that have been on Earth, right? That 90% or something along those lines are extinct, right? It's actually very difficult to live on Earth. To me, it's not so much the what, but the why. And maybe I guess some of the research that you put into this, maybe you can ask that, because look, I have no problem with this, and as you were talking about, I was just hearing a report where they were thinking about using CRISPR to bring back the woolly mammoth. I think another animal is the passenger pigeon. To me, it seems like we're on the verge. We're very close. There's going to be some work here, and yes, very soon, 5-10 years down the line, we may have the ability to see a woolly mammoth or a saber-toothed tiger or any of these some folks in hunting call charismatic megafauna to come back. I think the question is not what it will be why. Is there a reason why these animals were taken away? And also, what I always want to know, what are the issues that happens when you bring an animal like this back? Are they just going to be housed in like a zoo so we can like check out them out in a zoo, or is there a possibility of them mating with other animals and maybe that causing issues in ecological centers, in the African savanna or in the American savanna? Interesting, for sure that we can do this sort of work, but also should we, I think, is really one of the ultimate questions.
Yeah, and actually, personally, I believe we should do it. There's a lot of reasons why scientists are discussing why we should bring these animals back. But, I think we're talking about bringing back species that were specifically driven to extinction by humanity, by, us. I'm thinking about, there's an Arctic sea cow, which was a massive cousin to manatees that were 25 feet in length and could feed a crew of 33 sailors for a month. Things that were just amazing species that we've just, that we have driven to extinction, such as woolly mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, you were right, passenger pigeons, where over 1.5 million birds flew in flocks, and it was a beautiful sight to see over the United States. And, the dodo bird, specifically driven to extinction because it was on one small island that we killed off. I personally think there's still a lot of roadblocks in this technology. Mainly, who will care for the infant animal when it's created? Current technologies, which require surrogates, is that fair to already endangered species? Like, in order for us to have a woolly mammoth, we would have to use a real live elephant to give birth to that woolly mammoth. So there's also a lack of DNA for many of these species, and to bring back the species, you have to have enough variety to create a self-sustaining population. There's still other technology that are being developed, and like I mentioned earlier, CRISPR has been mentioned as a possibility to essentially edit the DNA of existing species to bring back their earlier ancestors, such as the chicken's ancestor, the T-Rex. So imagine slowly over time devolving a chicken back into a T-Rex. Like, there are some scientists who believe that that's the way that we can do it. Still, I think it's not often that we as a human species get a chance to redeem ourselves for our past mistakes. Actually being able to fix them, I think this is a really cool thing that we could do in the future. And they've talked about bringing woolly mammoths back, and that it could actually help all those holes that are opening up in Russia and the Arctic. That it could actually help our environment and repair ecosystems, and not just disrupt them again. There's things that we can do to repair them, and if there is, that's the next step. I think, we need to fix our own mistakes. We need to fix climate change. We need to fix these extinction of these majestic and beautiful animals that we have just murdered. And, I think that this is a great way to do that.
No, I totally agree. And, I think we're also seeing it's not just going to be CRISPR, but I think AI is going to have a part to play in this, right? Because we're going to also have to imagine what the world would be like with these animals in it. We don't really have the computing power and some of the models to understand what's going to happen when you place, a woolly mammoth, let's say in Siberia. What's going to happen to the local ecology. There's a lot of variables that happen there, whether it's weather, whether it's, how the animals are interacting with the natural foliage, predator and prey sort of models and stuff. A lot of these things take up a lot of variability. And so my guess is that it's not just going to be the people at CRISPR or the biologists that are crafting and synthesizing these unique DNA palettes and then craft and come up with these animals. It's not just that. It's probably going to take dedicated group of ecologists, biologists, anthropologists, because some of these animals will be living with human beings. And I think AI is going to actually take a good part of this, because it's going to ensure that we can understand and predict possibly what could happen. And I think it's just going to go hand in hand with this particular technology. And I'm hoping then that AI will then steward it on behalf of us. It's going to help us kind of figure it out. Is it a good thing to bring back the dodo bird and put it into a certain area? Like you were saying, animals, the reason why they were lost to us, right? It could mean ecology. It could mean humans. It could mean a lot of things. And all of that are variables. We're learning how to turn all of our understanding into a set of algorithms. And I'm very excited to see, I think, AI and these biological systems sort of come together. And there's probably going to be some sort of crazy, macro analysis done by some think tank somewhere that is going to say we are ready to reintroduce the woolly mammoth to XYZ place on the face of the earth, and let me tell you why. So I think what this technology is showing is there's actually going to be a lot of different technology. It's beyond just CRISPR. It's a lot of thinking that's going to have to come in this so humanity can think a little bit better on how to take care of these animals. We've come a long way from just using our spears to take down the woolly mammoths and take their tusk and their meat for the cold ice age. Right now, we can note the amount of animals in captivity. We could note how they're working inside of that ecological centers, and we can note all these things. And matter of fact, if we have sensors that track this actively, which I think are getting better every year, we're entering a place where I think we can look at the Earth as not just a experimenting ground and, oh, hey, let's drop rabbits or let's drop a wolf in Australia because we dropped rabbits in there 2 years ago. I don't think we're going to make those mistakes anymore, because we can actually game, if you will, the Earth, so we can ensure that these habitats are strong for the future.
Sure. So my last question then would be I guess for our listeners is, please feel free to tweet us, comment on our blog, or message us on LinkedIn or YouTube, and tell us what animals you would bring back and why, or what animals you wouldn't bring back, or you wouldn't even do this. We're always happy to engage with you. Just let us know what you're thinking about all this.
Okay, man. So my present futures topic is something we've been talking to and speaking on a little bit in the last couple of weeks. We've been talking about the future of food. We just had Alicia on talking to us about this. And I got this from FizOrg. This was just a couple weeks back. Research suggests that eating beans instead of beef would sharply reduce greenhouse gases. This is kind of in line with a lot of things that you and I have been talking about, right? The future of meat, the fact that animal production itself is a huge greenhouse gas emitter. We are in agreement that this is helping at least cause a little bit of climate change. Climate change is happening, so this is affecting our planet. And so one of the best things to do is figure out how to change food consumption. So I think, yes, this is really important. I'm not sure if we can get people to go and get rid of get rid of beef and just go right to beef. But this is, I think, a part of the equation. So this team that kind of looked at this, it was headed by Loma Linda University, LLU's researcher, Helen Harwat. So she suggests that this simple change, if Americans would just eat beans instead of beef, the United States would immediately realize 50 to 75% of its greenhouse gas reduction by 2020. So this isn't even 2050 or 2100. We're talking 2020. That's amazing. And pretty much what she's postulating is the same thing as what we've been giving voice to, right? That beef cattle is the most GHG, so greenhouse gas intensive food in terms of production, and that the production of legumes, so we're talking like peas and beans and pinto beans and all this stuff, is 1/40th of the amount of greenhouse gases as beef. And of course, this is beyond just methane, right? Cow farts, right? This is, when we're talking about food production, we're talking about the waste from a food. We're talking about the clearing of the land, which means you're clearing trees, and then also the transportation of everything back and forth. So, yes, I think this is a particularly novel idea. I think in some ways, though, it's less to me. The reason why I brought this up is because, one, that number is astounding. The fact that we can get rid of 50 to 75%, or at least reach our reductions by 2020. It's 2017. That's 3 years. That's a ridiculous amount. So I think more and more, and maybe this is because I watched Cowspiracy, and that movie freaked me out, and I started thinking about all the animal production around the world and how really not only land intensive but also greenhouse gas intensive it is. I think this gave me a pause and made me think, look, we're getting more and more information that whatever we've been doing in the past decade or so, or decades, because I think animal production goes back, at least well, not only thousands of years, but I'm talking about the factory of it, the clearing of lands, the creating of these huge farms, probably, let's say 4 or 5 decades, right? That we just did it. We didn't think about it. And that's typically what a futurist likes to dip their hands in, is like, okay, what did humans do without thinking about what was going to happen? There wasn't a futurist who in the 1960s was like, hey, should we clear all these trees and put all these cows here and whatnot? So the impact here is outstanding. Now I have a little beef, if you will, when it comes with switching over to legumes. We were talking with Alicia about maybe moving to bugs or different types of meat. We were talking about lab-grown meat, which is a possibility as well. I think that's even better, because it's so hard to get people's culture out of eating meat. But it's time that we all, in humanity, stopped, I think, just singularly focusing on the fossil fuel industry. While I don't think it's okay or it's sustainable to drill 2.5-mile bores into the earth to pull out black gook that we then use all this more black gook in order to turn into something for combustible so we can run around. I don't think that's sustainable, but I also don't think we could easily just say, okay, we're all going to eat beans tomorrow. That's just not going to happen. So
we don't even know if beans are the same type of nutrition. Like, I mean, can you get the same nutrition as you can from beef as you can from beans? I don't know.
Well, yes. I mean, in short, yes. The fact is that you can get the same protein sort of aspects, right, from beans. But one thing is that human beings, one of the reasons that is postulated by science currently is that the human brain expanded was our meat eating that happened, right? So we came out from the Africa savanna, we came out of the trees, we hung around innocuous animals, we were able to craft stone tools, and eventually we ate meat. Now, I don't think humans 200,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago thought about being able to just drive down the street in their in their chariot and be able to purchase any meat they want. We got a little greedy, we got a little crazy, and we didn't stop. And only now, I think, are we seeing. I mean, and I'm talking about now. I'm not talking about even 10 years ago. Nobody was really talking about animal production and its hurt of the planet. I think we've been blindsided by the whenever you see a call for Earth, right? You always see the same pictures. You see the smokestacks, you see the cars, you see the oil sludge in a river, and I'm not saying that is not something that we should mitigate. I'm not saying that that's not something that we should not think about. But if we're going to really be real futurists and want to optimize our planet as best as possible and think about all the ways that we can mitigate potential disaster, just this alone, the numbers alone should be fairly alarming to anyone who wants to better our planet. It seems like we're going to have to figure out a better way to feed the people around our planet, and a part of it is not using the cattle industry and, to pardon my phrase, but raping the land and cutting our nose off despite our faces. We can go to electric cars now all we want, but if we don't do anything about the way we produce meat, these numbers, they're not going to get any better, and it's going to be disastrous for our planet.
Well, and it's exactly like what you were saying. It's non-sustainable. I mean, as humanity is growing, as our numbers continue to increase, at least until we're thinking 2050, 2100, where is all this going to come from? Are we going to continue to have more cows? I mean, because if you look at emerging economies, their desire for meat grows. So, if they're coming out of the second or third world into the first world or whatever, their demand grows. I mean, we're looking at, if we were to, just in this country alone, if we were to eliminate cattle production, that would actually give us back 42% of the current cropland under production. That's 1.65 million square kilometers, or roughly 1.5 Californias. So 1.5 Californias is what we would get back in this country alone. I do see that there is some positiveness, some positivity that I'm seeing from this. After we talked to Alicia and other things like that, I did a little bit more research. So one in three of Americans are purchasing meat analogs now, so fake meat. So hopefully that means that the trend will continue. There's supposedly a thing called the Impossible Burger that's out on the West Coast. Unfortunately, we on the East Coast aren't cool enough yet to get it, but it's supposedly an amazing substitute for burgers. I've never had one, but I'd like to. Maybe we can stop the cattle. If we could figure out how to. There's some technologies that are using that. So cattle actually burp out methane. So there's a way that they're trying to capture that and then maybe use that as a fuel or something like that. I mean, I think that's pretty cool if we can capture it, put it back in the ground, do something with it. I think that's a great option. I think that there's people are coming up with solutions, and I think that that's just kind of one of the greatest attributes of humanity is when we're faced with a very difficult task, we find a way to combat it. And I see that happening, and I'm hoping this is one time where I'm an optimist, Chris. So
yeah, no, well, I am too. And I think I was saying it earlier, right? We now know that this is an issue. It's kind of like back in the 1940s and 50s when oil companies and environmentalists were starting to come along, in the 60s, getting to Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, where we're going all the way back even to Upton Sinclair and the meat packing industry, from the jungle. We are aware that, oh, hey, by the way, we shouldn't get rid of all this land, clear all this land, and use all of this land just for cattle production. Oh, hey, by the way, it's not just the feeding and the manure, but it's actually the movement, the refrigeration, the food waste. There's all these things that are happening all at the same time. And it is having as big an impact to the earth, to, Mother Gaia, as, just straight up oil and matter of fact, more. So, it's something we can't ignore. It's something that we need to be aware of. And while I would love to have a 50 to 75% greenhouse gas decrease with legumes, I don't think America is going to go ahead and start those beans and peas and soy diet anytime soon. I think, like you said, there's a lot of innovations are happening. I think because people like ourselves are giving voice to this, because of documentaries like Cowspiracy, which we'll put in the show notes. I think because people are aware that this is a possibility, you're seeing companies like the Good Food Institute, which we spoke on at this podcast. We're seeing futurist firms like Alicia's kind of trying to tackle this hard to solve problem. And I think I'm looking forward to seeing the many innovations that are going to be coming out that's going to hopefully tackle this. Extremely important to our planet, extremely important to our stomachs. All right, great. So for PaleoFutures today, we have the mother of all demos. This is one of my favorite futurist things that I know about, I guess. It's a demo. It's a name given by to Douglas Engelbart's December 9th, 1968. Just remember that, December 9th, 1968, computer demonstration at the Association for Computing Machinery Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, right? So it was this conference that was happening in San Francisco in 1968, and it was a live demo. And you can actually see it on YouTube. So it's pretty amazing. We'll put the link in the show notes. So essentially what this was, it was a live demonstration of a lot of the computer hardware and software that we commonly now use. And the people that were in the room and or the folks that were around this area, so this was done at the Stanford University, at the Stanford Research Institute. This inspired the computing technology explosion that happened in the 1970s. And then, of course, which led to the personal computing explosion in the 1980s, which led to everything that's happening in your phone. So here's just, in the 90-minute presentation, there was Windows, there was hypertext, there was graphics, there was a mouse. He used a computer mouse for the first time. There was word processing, like Microsoft Word. There was file linking. He could link things. There was revision. You could tell what was being revised all at the same time. There was literally real-time editing, collaborative work happening all at the same time. And you could actually see his face. So as of right now, Jack, I'm looking at your face on my, Mac. And, I mean, just totally amazing. I mean, really, really, really cool. And it all happened in this hall that was housing these nerds that were just checking out what this, guy was doing, right? So
he had a huge team. He had a huge team of people.
Yeah, well, I mean, so it wasn't just him, turning on his computer and allow it to happen. There was a big group of folks that brought this all together. So it was a really sort of interesting, excellent way of understanding the future of where computing was going to go. I know that this actually helped propel Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. I know people like, obviously Bill Gates, any of the other computing pioneers looked at this as really one of the things that inspired them to develop personal computing. And really a lot of the folks really just thought that Douglas Engelbart himself was a true pioneer. So, he was known for founding the field of human-computer interaction. He worked at the Augmentation Research Lab at SRI. He was a part of the creation of that computer mouse and the development of all these things. So, in some ways, Douglas Engelbart and the mother of all demos may be one of the singular points in history that you could say that completely launched the modern era. And so I thought it was a particularly important PaleoFutures to kind of talk about.
Yeah, but Chris, why do you think that he didn't get much credit? Like, because you were talking about like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Wozniak, but a lot of his ideas were then used to create other things, and he didn't get that much credit. Was it because they all three of them monetized what he was talking about and turned it into things that, like you're right, the personal computer and things like that?
Well, yeah. I mean, in some ways, you're absolutely right. If you read Walter Isaacson's The Innovators, one thing that you'll get from that book is that much like was it Stephen Hawking? I think he wrote Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, where Stephen Hawking, I believe it was Stephen Hawking. It was one of those crazy physicist, and and he was saying that the work of Stephen Hawking and the work of our current theoretical physicists, Neil deGrasse Tyson and Kaku and all these amazing Gates, these amazing folks that are doing really cool stuff, talking about black holes and pulsars and quasars and dark energy, that they wouldn't exist unless they stood on the shoulders of giants, Copernicus, Newton, Galileo, going all the way up to Einstein. It's just everybody's standing on everyone else to get to where we need to be. And the modern computing industry and the modern computing world that we live in is just a collection of people stepping on on the shoulders of other people, from Ava Lovelace and the Babbage counting machine to the Mark II in Harvard to Douglas Engelbart, right? And you could see that there's current touchstones that people use in order to imagine, to ideate what are the possibilities of computing and where this could take you. So, I think what you have here, and this is actually where futures happens, and that's why it's really great for us to actually scan like we do, right? And for good futurists to scan, because this, if you are a good futurist, or if you are a good technologist, a good entrepreneur, and you heard about what Engelbart did, or you were in the room, think about how your mind would work when you saw this crazy new technology that was happening. How am I going to get this in the hands of every person on Earth? The ability to cross-collaborate, the ability to see someone else from afar. And, some of these things did not happen for a very long time. I myself was not using, things like Skype until, I don't know, maybe 2004. So that we're talking, remember, 1968. I mean, that was 40 years ago. So there's many steps between my Mac and Skype and, Microsoft Word and all these, Trello, which we use, which is cross-collaborating and whatnot. The ability to, whenever I send an email or send a document, the ability for you to, make a change to that document and us to note that these were all fairly inventive. But of course, you might not remember Engelbart, but you also might not remember the guy who wrote the Excel program. Or you might not remember the founder of the technology that spawned Skype, but here we are using it. So I think it's to people like Engelbart or to people like Tim Berners-Lee. I don't think they're looking for credit. I think they were looking to amaze. I think they were looking to propel. And it just so happened that folks like Jobs and Wozniak were able to ideate and to imagine how this technology could not only embed itself in people's households, but also embed itself in people's hands.
Well, it was so long lasting. Like, I mean, if you look at, the mouse that came out of this, the keyboard, modern operating systems, all of these things, like he had the precursors to Word, and we've been using this for decades, 40, 50 years. The mouse and the keyboard, while it's changed slightly, it's still pretty much the same. I mean, he talked and, created a system, the first system, maybe one of the first systems to evolve. So, the idea of AI, intelligent computers, learning, he had the first presentation of its kind. You're right, like the, first integrated system for manipulating text. Like, all of these things came out of this. And so even though, I watched the video, it's kind of long. but you have to realize the technologies that he's using were just so way before their time.
Absolutely. And it's, again, if you would just want to scan through it and take a look at it, obviously it's stunted, right? And you could tell they wanted to make it a show. They really did as best as they can. You know what I mean? And it was super interesting that this happened. And so he gave the demonstration. The audience just totally gave him a standing ovation. And this was super big, right? This was in so many words, as Fred Turner states in his book From Counterculture to Cyberculture, Engelbart promulgated a philosophy of bootstrapping in which each experimental transformation of the socio-technical system that the NLS, which was the system that he was using, would feed back into itself and cause it to evolve and presumably to improve. So in some ways, this was the egg that spawned everything from the first functional personal computer out of Xerox to the Apple II, the Lisa, to Windows, all these things. These things were made possible because this guy in a room full of geeks in 1968 worked his butt off along with his team to make something like this possible. This is the type of stuff that I'd love to see, and I'd love to see people create imaginative, cool future worlds, and it's inspire people. Truly inspiring stuff, Engelbart. Truly inspiring.
We live in a greedy little world that teaches every little boy and girl to earn as much as they can possibly, then turn around and spend it foolishly. We created as a credit card mess.
Okay, so this one is a first. Instead of offering you a new technology or tech firm to invest in on FizBiz today, I'm actually going to give you some advice about what not to invest in.
Uh-oh, jeez.
Yeah. So like I said, we're precursing every one of these just in case someone's like, hey, I lost money or something like that. We're not responsible for any type of investment decisions you make. They are based on your own decisions. We're just stating our opinions. So that's what we're going to do today, like we do every day.
Well, Christopher Manfredi Industries is not on that, right? That's still a solid, a solid buy, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. So venture capitalist Mark Anderson recently was quoted as saying that current car manufacturers are like Nokia was. They see software as an add-on, and not an essential component of motor vehicles of today. And so I'm going to talk about the quote-unquote classic car companies. While it's unusual for us here to, again, talk about not investing in something, recent reports have gotten us interested in the future of the automobile industry as a whole, and as you know, we've talked about it a lot on our show. Now, this topic has often been one which Chris and I diverge on where we think it's going to be in the future, but personally, I still firmly believe that the future of autonomous vehicles is not on the roads, where we have crumbling infrastructure, but instead in the sky, which requires little to no infrastructure at all. In 2015, the United States government spent $416 billion on infrastructure projects. So currently there's roughly 205 million adults in the United States, which means that we're spending about $2,069 per adult in the United States on infrastructure projects, where instead we could be spending that money on other modes of transportation. What these figures also don't include is the lost money from motor vehicle accidents, from lost productivity, spending time in traffic, and other issues related to poor infrastructure. With the United States cities expected to only continue to grow, and in my own native Atlanta, with an average of 1.5 hour commute, the population is expected to almost double by 2050. Something's got to give. So, Chris, what do you see is the future of transportation?
Well, we talk about this all the time, right? Obviously, autonomous vehicles is really important. I find Elon Musk's other offering, the Boring Company, actually is another possibility, where instead of us spending our time dealing in a three-dimensional world and smashing into the housing and the buildings and whatnot, we can go underneath our cities, and that would actually make for a even better cityscape landscape, if you will, because that means that we won't have to worry about the traffic getting in the front of all of these houses and stuff. So I'm not a fan of flying cars. At least just yet. I know you are. It scares me. But, that being said, to me, I think a lot of the future of vehicles and the traffic issues is going to be taken care of with a lot of this autonomous vehicles, because we're going to be able to understand and calculate exactly where traffic is. I think we'll be able to create better and more holistic thinking systems, now that we look at the urban environment a little bit better. And if we can combine autonomous cars with different ways of dealing with traffic to include underground, I think we might be able to put ourselves in a good position to negate and lessen the horribleness that is sitting in traffic for multiple hours.
Well, and I agree with you. I think autonomous vehicles, they're coming. They're going to be here. I mean, they're already on the roads in a lot of places. I think that is the next step. But then the next step after that is where I'm talking about, like, flying cars. I think that, actually many tech companies are actually realizing this. And, the predictions of, like, the 1900s, where they all thought we were going to be flying around in cars by now, in the 1950s, I think that's actually coming. There's companies trying to get into more of the investment side of it. There's companies like Lilium, which is a German-based company with a functional flying car already. There's Uber, who's planning on trying to create an autonomous flying car service by 2020. And traditional companies like Airbus, they're all trying to get in on this craze. Therefore, I think if you're a savvy investor, you need to pay close attention to these companies and see which one is going to be the first to market and which one can corner it in the future. Because even though you're first to the market doesn't mean that you're going to corner the market. This is where some of the classic car companies are actually seeing, I think, the writing on the wall. And many of them are investing in autonomous technologies and Uber-like companies. GM, who a couple of years ago invested $500 million in Lyft. There's still few of these companies that are investing in. There's the problem that there's only a couple that are investing in these types of aerial autonomous technologies. Not a lot of the classic companies are doing that. So, I mean, but just imagine this. Instead of one pathway on a road, imagine living far outside a city and being able to commute with no traffic, as there are literally thousands of paths you can take to avoid hitting other vehicles in the air. I mean, and one of the hardest things to solve with autonomous vehicles is the human factor. Then this will be almost a thing of the past, as there won't be any there won't be any kids playing with their soccer balls that might come out in the street in the last minute. I mean, we've had autonomous vehicles since the 80s, but they were able to drive on the highways. The problem is the human factor. If all of these vehicles were recognizing each other in the air and planning flight paths, this wouldn't be a problem. Obviously, you would still have to worry about flight, birds and things like that, but there would be a lot less items. There's not going to be a deer that jumps out in front of your car and that you're going to hit, because even an autonomous vehicle, they're going to have to slam on the brakes, and you may not be able to stop that. So, I mean, Chris, you tell me. I mean, what issues do you see? What problems do you see with, like, flying vehicles? Like, that you said they scare you. Like, I mean, tell me what's up, man. Like, I that's part of the reason I like these conversations, is because you have a different opinion than I do, and I like to hear it.
I think the autonomous vehicles in general, whether it's autonomous drone technology or just autonomous road vehicles to include cars, trucks, and buses, that's what's going to stop me from being so worried, right? Because, like you said, the human factor is really important. I also wonder about the propulsion. So, what are the propulsion mechanisms? One issue when it comes to travel is actually jet fuel and the ability to have jet fuel and have a lot of it. The cost structure's there. So, we're talking a completely different cost structure than gasoline and or electric. So, one thing that flying cars doesn't do is sort of solve that for me just yet. Right, I don't know how much power would need to be embedded in let's say electrical autonomous flying vehicles. Right, sounds amazing. Sounds something that's great. In some ways, I think autonomous would have to be a part of it. We would have to have a tightly constricted or constructed traffic structure. We would have to have probably almost it would be another job, actually. So this is great for the people that are afraid about the jobs. We'd have urban traffic engineers that would sit in some sort of screen, and they would be there to ensure, almost like the electrical grid, to ensure that the traffic patterns autonomously were operating correctly and to mitigate any potential disasters. Right. So let's go ahead and put autonomous to the side. We're saying in order for flying cars to happen, that we would have to ensure that autonomous is the only way to go. Or I would say at least that's you would have to have some sort of special license to be able to operate your vehicle through non-autonomous ways. The other factor, though, that I think we should give some pause to is, how do you power these vehicles? Do you do it through natural gas? There are currently natural gas airplanes that are in the air. How robust is that in terms of a fuel source? It's really not. I did do a natural gas forecast about 7 years ago. I haven't looked that up, but maybe that's something I can look up. But as far as I know, natural gas as a fuel source has not been optimized in order to propel, airplanes and whatnot, right? So I think, too, electric vehicles. Like, can you have electric vehicles be able to be used to propel, these objects, right? And is it helicopters? Is it jet engines? Is it a new sort of propulsion that we're talking about? What are the maintenance costs when it comes to this? An airplane or any sort of hovering capability, jet technology may cost a little bit more in terms of the pocketbook. Now, of course, those economics of scale could shape the personal consumer flying vehicle cost structures, right, that are put onto it, but we don't know what that means, or we don't know what that is. And keep in mind, we've had 100 years of a progress in terms of vehicles, right? It was just in the 1920s that they were these rickety things that you had 4 gears and you had to crank the front, and even in the 70s, and we're talking about just 30-40 years ago, where inefficient fuel, gas guzzling, you didn't want to drive these things, or they didn't have the same security or safety issues as well. So my only pause is that when it comes to flying vehicles is there's so many questions and stones unturned. There's so many things that we can think about and we need to give pause to. And so when I start to see some of those questions answered robustly, I'd feel a little bit better stepping inside your DeLorean so we can go take off to go see Jaws in 4D or whatever.
Well, I mean, you're completely right. There's a lot of concepts out there right now. Like, a lot of these companies have vastly different types of flying vehicles. There are some that are cars that can drive them that can also fly in the air. There are some that have rotors and they look like helicopters, but there's like 18 of them. There's like Airbus concepts are having like an actual bus that can fly. How would you power that?
Have you seen? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Have you seen the guy? I just saw it. It was like a week ago, and it was the hovering guy. He was on this like jet. I mean, not the jetpack, right? Because the jetpack's a completely different thing. It was a gentleman. He was on a platform, and he looked like some sort of like either secret agent, James Bond, or a villain. He could have been a villain, just zipping up and coming down.
That he is actually engaging with the U.S. military right now, and the military is thinking about buying those, so each soldier will have one.
Oh, man.
So they can go up in the air like 56, they can go like super high up in the air, and they could travel like 56 miles. So can you imagine every soldier having one of those? It's super lightweight, costs about $11,000 to $12,000. So that's actually the U.S. government's contracting with him right now on doing that. Pretty neat concept. But I mean, going back to the autonomous vehicles, our battery technology is improving. What I see, and you're right. I think this is going to be driven by cost. By the consumer is going to be like, well, I want to find the cheapest, but also the safest. Obviously that's what they're thinking. Well, there's a company out there that says that their autonomous vehicle, which they have created and it's already gone through its test flights, they said that it would cost. I mean, you live close to New York, so it would cost from Manhattan to JFK $10 to $12 to transport somebody. That's less than what a taxi costs now. So they're saying they could do that economically, and it would be with a battery charged vehicle. So I mean, these things are coming, and I think people are I don't know. I mean, personally, I think you need to hold your money and invest in a company that's going to make autonomous vehicles first. Obviously, like we said, I think that's going to be the first thing that happens. And then possibly flying vehicles should be their second option. So I would invest in a company that is building these for the ground, but then also thinking about the sky for the future and near future, because I think that, that's a perfect example for, what we just got a D+ on our infrastructure in the United States. Instead of repairing that, which would cost billions and billions and billions of dollars, we need to look at alternative means of transportation that are, coming into existence now. So, I mean, like I discussed, I think the future of transportation is up in the air. Sorry. fun. So, I mean, there are
Good
several
one.
new age cities- yeah, but there are several new age cities that are starting to realize that alternative transportation is the future. And one city in Saudi Arabia is actually being built without any roads at all. I believe this is the future. Cities, I think that these vehicles will no longer be owned by people. They're saying that, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, companies like Uber and Lyft will have 25% of all traffic. So all traffic will be Uber or Lyft or a ride-sharing company, something like that. That's the future, and cities will see that there will be no need for roads anymore. As we'll be arriving to work, we'll push a button on our phone, we'll have a drone vehicle pick us up, drop us off at work, and pick the kids up from soccer practice. I think that's the future.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think where you want to go is it's not just the people that are developing the technology to make these happen, right? It's not just going to the sexy auto show and seeing the cool, neat helicopter car that you can step into and it's sexy with, Brazilian wood paneling and leather seats and all that. Obviously, that is super cool and super interesting. What you're seeing now, though, is that not only, vehicle companies, but also hopefully these autonomous flying car vehicles, flying machines, if you will, they are partnering with technology companies. So, whether it's Apple, whether it's Google, Uber, and if they're able to partner beyond these technology companies, I'm interested in fuel sources, like I was saying before, in traffic systems. I'm talking throat to choke. Put me into this world. Let me be in it, but also let me be in this world as through safety and in a proactive foresight mindset, so I could feel safe in not only the sky but also in my pocketbook.
Yeah, I think 2020, 2025, we're going to see these technologies emerge, and it's going to be cool. I mean, that's what Uber's planning. They're saying 2020 is when they're going to roll out their fleet of, autonomous flying vehicles. So we'll see.
All right, I'll see you there. Okay, great. So for the interview segment, we will be speaking to futurist Jason Swanson. So I actually first met Jason during my time at the University of Houston Futures program. He's been doing futures work even before that, since 2008. More recently, he has been the director of strategic foresight at KnowledgeWorks Foundation. Guy is just a super excellent guy. Say hello, Jason.
Hello, everyone. Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, man. I'm ready to get into it. So Jason, your work's been in the future of education space, and you've been sort of in and around that space for a while. Tell me, what's the future of teaching people?
Uncertain, complicated. Just I suppose like any future, right? So yeah, as you mentioned, the bulk of my work has been around the future of education and the future of learning. And so when we begin to talk about education futures or learning futures, sometimes it's easier to dive into specific domains, right? So when we talk about education, there's a lot going on. Everything from assessment, learning environments, right? So people we call learning agents. So who might enter into the profession of teaching and the education profession, all the way up to, really thinking about the future of readiness and the future of work. So as we look at all these things and we look at kind of advancements and trend lines outside of education that are beginning to have an effect on education itself, so all the exogenous change in the world, we can begin to make a couple of really interesting assumptions about the broader future of education. So, speaking very generally, we can expect over time education to become more personalized. Now, whether that personalization in terms of content happens in the classroom or outside of the formal learning environment, say, things you do in an after-school program or an enrichment or just things that happen at home, you're using the internet to learn things, that's a critical uncertainty. But we can say generally we expect the future of learning to become increasingly personalized. And I believe it's going to become increasingly decentralized. But by what I mean by decentralizing the future of education, if we take a look at the K-12 sector, we see a lot of new players coming in that aren't part of a formal K-12 structure, right? So we've got things like, the school choice movement. It's obviously not new, but that's a great example of decentralizing how you might go about a formal education. You have school choice. You can go different places, right? For good or for ill. There's a lot of arguments to support school choice, a lot of arguments to say it actually weakens education. If we look beyond the K-12 sector into the higher ed sector, we see a lot of interesting emerging credentials, micro-credentials popping to the fore, things like Udacity's nano degree. So all these things speak to greater agency for their learner in terms of increased personalization. So I have options now, right? And it's not that linear progression where I have to go to the public school. I have to go to the higher ed institution. So, in broad strokes, increasingly personal, increasingly decentralized, more options over time. As we get farther into the future and we look at potential futures of work, things get really interesting, right? If we look at what we think of as the main purposes for education, our main purpose, at least for compulsory K-12 school, it's typically, the official answer is probably, I'm going to get you ready for career and civic life, right? Well, as the career portion becomes increasingly uncertain and begins to really change, that really begins to call into question one of the main purposes for K-12 learning, right? If I were to completely take career preparation out of that, what does formal education begin to look like if it's just centered around developing the whole person to be a better citizen? So there's a lot of questions that are kind of revolving around the larger future and the larger purpose for education, but I think it's all interesting and exciting things. I think the education system is something that we can agree on. It's a good thing, but it's maybe not serving the needs of learners currently. It's a system that's very entrenched, very, very slow to change. I think everybody has an idea for a new system and what a system that works looks like, but nobody can quite agree on what that is. And I think that's actually really, really exciting too. Like if we all agreed it'd be this kind of monolithic system that, I don't know, it's not as fun if there's broad agreement as to what it should be.
So do you think that possibly the future of education is almost even going back to what education maybe was around maybe Aristotle or Socrates' time, going into the Middle Ages, where it was very kind of a wide open educational pursuit, and we kind of went and tried to pick up and learn whatever we could, instead of this maybe regimented, you're going to learn this at this time at this grade and move yourself to this grade. But maybe you can also give color also, the folks that were getting that education at that time, really these were the elites, the people that may have had educated fathers and mothers. So how do you balance the highly personalized, decentralized model of education, but while also retaining a true balance of equal education levels across society? Is that something that you can do? And are there mechanisms in the future of education that are being created to ensure that that'll happen?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So my view is that it can be done, and it could actually be done today if we so chose. You're talking about a radical shift, though. The seeds are being sown for this. They're being sown very slowly. So the emerging competency-based education movement really speaks to divorcing progression via seat time from mastering content, right? So it used to be I could sit in a chair
Can you just for clarity, progression via seat time? So
progression via seat time.
So what does that actually mean to the audience?
Yeah, so I attend school. I don't necessarily need to master the content, right? I can kind of do the lowest denominator of work, and then I progress to my next grade or grade. So one of the promises for competency-based education is that it's based around mastery and not seat time. So that if it takes me longer than your average student to master algebra, that's just how it is. It's going to take longer, and I'm going to move when I'm ready. Conversely, if I'm a whiz and can rocket through it, that's great. I'm going to move you forward. So it allows for that degree of personalization while at the same time keeping a standards-based approach to your question of can you do it and basically ensure quality, right? So I think that's really, really promising. Now, that's happening now, right? So that beyond competency-based education, the ESSA reauthorization that went through last year at the federal level.
What's the ESSA?
So it's federal policy, federal education policy.
Okay.
But there's one specific piece of it that I think is really interesting, in that it gives states a lot of freedom in how they want to pursue things like assessment. So if you're a state that like mine in Pennsylvania, right, where you're kind of governed by standardized testing, it allows you wiggle room in terms of policy to begin seeking out other more innovative forms of assessment. So just from that lens, we begin to get kind of back into that old time education where it's not just about discrete knowledge and recall and closing achievement gaps, but can I really get down to brass tacks and figure out if you know what you know? Now, I think, I alluded to this a little bit ago, but the changing future of work, I think, is really going to have a massive effect on what we're getting you ready for, right? And before I said, school is really built around getting you ready for career and for citizenship, for civics, right? Becoming a good citizen. We just completed a forecast into what we consider the future of readiness. We're calling it Readiness Redefined. And what we looked at were, how is work changing? Because work really governs what we're getting you ready for, right? And what we came away with was really this deep insight that education, rather than trying to close achievement gaps, which are very worthy of trying to close, and trying to get you ready vis-a-vis just knowledge recall and discrete skill building, right? I think of those as kind of your software. Those are your apps, right? So if I needed a specific skill, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to build that app out, I'm going to download that software. The changing nature of work, right, is really not so much a question of, am I going to get you ready for a post-work world? It's really a question of, how do I get you ready for a working environment that's experiencing accelerating rates of change? And you're going to deal with increasing ambiguity and fluidness in your career. Now, that might mean you're a contingent worker and you don't know where the next job is coming from. And I'm doing, multiple jobs simultaneously and they're all different. Or it could just mean you're working for a company and your job is just fluid, right? So if we're going to look at that and go, oh, wow, there's all this accelerating change, and that there's this increased fluidity and ambiguity, maybe the question isn't so much, do I get you ready by giving you better software? Because your software is going to have to change rapidly. Maybe the question is, do I get you ready by improving your hardware? So at that point, instead of our readiness indicators and our kind of current portrait of a graduate with your discrete skills and knowledge, it really becomes about developing a new frame of readiness that includes social and emotional learning, metacognitive practices, so that you've got that deep self-knowledge, you've upgraded your hardware so that to respond to the need to constantly shift your software, if that makes any sense. So that gets us back to that kind of Aristotle approach of, deep self-knowledge and kind of, that love of learning how to learn, as opposed to just training you for this skill and getting you into this workforce pipeline.
This makes a lot of sense, especially sort of where we're at in the present world. So one thing that is maybe terrible about our current world, right, is the excessive amount of media and information that we're getting, right? And so it's like, oh, wow, we're just constantly bombarded with a deluge of information. And how do we sort of sift and keep our head above water to keep it going? But what I say as a caveat to that is, wow, oh my God, we are ingesting more information now than ever before. And not just, the people at the Harvard and the Sorbonne and MIT, not just, they have access to all these scientific papers and all these, text analytics scraping. No, I'm talking John Q. Public sitting in the middle of, Pig's Knuckle, Arkansas, is able to read and download whatever he wants. So that means that really learning and the ability to you don't have to go to, the hallowed halls of Oxford or wherever you want to go around the world and sift through their books, because pretty soon, as we're moving, information is readily available. So learning as we go is a perceived potential future. Matter of fact, it's happening right now. But learning how to learning the critical thinking skills, knowing knowing when is the best time for you to ingest information, when's the best time for you to present information. Are you a good presenter? Are you better at going in a darkened room and cranking out some code? Or are you better working with people and having a more of an interpersonal, system? Or is there a way actually to learn those through activities and whatnot? So actually this personalization, decentralization, but also readiness model that you're pitching here, it seems to make a lot of sense in the present form. So have there been any sort of experiments in this work? Are there anybody leading with this sort of stuff? Any schools or programs that you've worked with, or that you guys are embedding this inside?
Yeah. So not really is the easy answer. There are a couple of really bright spots. So the first group I should highlight is a company. It's a startup called Knack. KNACK. And what Knack has done is created an app that measures all those soft skills. They call them Knacks. So what's your SEL profile, right? So what social and emotional skills do you have? How can we metrics cognition and metacognition, right? So they've done a great job in creating a platform with that, and they've taken it a step further in that they're working with higher ed. They're working with a lot of folks from the employment sector to develop kind of these leadership profiles. So if you've got this certain score combined with your credentials, you would probably be a good fit for these jobs. They've developed a really interesting college readiness profile that's based on SEL, metacognition, and cognition. So they're doing some really interesting things in that space. We've seen weak signals here and there of SEL coming into school. So Mastery Charter School in Philly, all of their staff are trauma trained and trauma informed to work with their students to understand when things are happening. The Yale Center for Social and Emotional Intelligence, they have a great app called Ruler, which is a check-in for a classroom, so you can get your finger on the pulse of their emotional state to figure out when they're in an optimal state to learn. And then I'm going to butcher her name, and I apologize, Melina, but I believe her name is Dr. Melina Unkaffer from Stanford, is doing a lot of really interesting things in terms of curriculum and school design, where they're able to kind of get that same score that Knack does. So what's your cognitive profile? And then how can I begin to enable flow states through games to train specific cognitive attributes in a student? So it really, really fascinating stuff. None of it's happening at scale. So, it's the education system is just at a place now where I think they're going, we need to make key decisions based on learning science, right? So all this stuff is really, really new for the system itself. But I would suspect that in terms of ed tech, we're going to see more of the SEL angle in the coming years. In the philanthropic world, looking at equity is a massive issue, but now it seems to be also pivoting into social and emotional learning and skills as well. So it's very, very slow to move right now, but it is starting to move, which is I think a good sign.
So you went right through it, but I'm glad you brought it up, because I think this is also extremely interesting to speak on. And you talked a little bit about flow state, right? And this is I have done some research in flow state. I mean, it's just a fascinating thing. I think it's been researched since the 60s and 70s. Essentially, what I understand about flow state, maybe you can help me with this is kind of like when Matter of fact, I mean, here's a personal example, right? I'm a licensed massage therapist. I don't know if you knew that. I've been doing it for about 7 years. I put myself through grad school doing it. And so, yeah, it's super cool, right? So it seems appropriate that I would know something about flow state because essentially that's what I'm doing when I do massage. I've been doing it for so long. I've been doing it about 7 years, 6,500 hours. So whenever I do it, I just do it. I don't think about it. There's no thought process behind it. And I remember what it was like at hour one. It was very difficult, and it was hard for me to fathom being able to do this for 6,500 hours. So, when we think of flow state, we think of people like a Tiger Woods, Serena Williams, LeBron James, whatever the heck Max Tegmark is doing. These folks that have an ability to latch on to something that they do. Coders, somebody like a Bill Gates or a Mark Zuckerberg, someone who has extremely technical, spatial, physical abilities where they're not thinking about something, they're just doing. So is flow state and the reaction based on internal knowledge skill sets, is this something that the education community is thinking about? And also, are there any sort of activities or experiences that an educator can create that could allow for the flow state mechanisms to thrive and even develop for would-be educatees?
Sure. So all good stuff. So I like to think of flow as just you're in the zone, right? Like it's the most simple explanation I could put forth. Now there's a lot of agreement in terms of the circumstances that create a flow state, but in terms of triggering one, that seems to be very subjective. So video games and movies tend to be really good at getting you into a state of flow, especially video games. So if I can remember correctly, you could help me kind of walk through this again. So a proper state of flow, like that situation should feel tough but doable. You receive constant feedback. So in this case of a video game, your score, right? The rules are clearly defined, but the goal seems challenging. You can grasp it, but it is sort of just out of reach, right? So that's why I feel like a lot of adrenaline type sports, I think, have people that access the flow state a little bit more readily than, say, like a student studying for something. So that creates some challenge for a classroom teacher into how can we get kids en masse into a state of flow. I think the work around kind of SEL and checking in on kind of the emotional tone of a room is a good start. Mindfulness training is a great start, but I think that the biggest promise lies in, to me, from my perspective, two things. So using emerging technologies that are highly immersive. So AR, mixed reality, VR, and then having AI catch up, right? Specifically effective computing or effective or emotive artificial intelligence that can do things like read your eye tracking or any kind of other bio-response, heart rate, and dial into where you are emotionally, manipulate your emotional state to get you into a state of flow. I think that has the most promise. I would love to see it be done at a classroom level for like 30 kids at once. Sure. I think it'll be challenging though, because if it's subjective, right? What might throw you into a flow state might not throw me into a flow state, but there's people working really diligently on it. One of the surefire ways that I've been told is, transdermal cranial shocking?
Whoa.
Yeah, it sounds gnarly, right? Which is, for anybody curious, I would highly suggest the Radiolab episode 9 Volt Nirvana.
Oh, so yeah, I missed that. I need to listen to that one.
It's amazing, but DARPA and the military are very interested in this, and essentially it's applying a very, very low electric current to your head. So it shocks the brain, and it actually throws you into a state of flow. So for fighter pilots and snipers, it's a really great thing to have, right? Time slows down, you receive more information, it feels like you're moving in slow motion, you absorb more information. There's been a couple of products that have come on the market, so things like Think, THYNC, which is designed to put you in a Zen state through a low current shock. So there's things out there. I would have some issues suggesting that we use that for school students, for children, but there are consumer grade products out there to do these things too.
Yeah, well, I mean, you just mentioned it, so I figured I would see what was going on. But in some ways, I think that's the cart before the horse, right? Like, we would have a society full of flow state thinkers, and everyone's just awesome. But maybe that's coming at the level to where we're downloading stuff kind of like Neo, and then all of a sudden we're really awesome at Kung Fu, maybe, But I think going, because you said something else that I've been reading about in terms of the future of education. That is the idea of gamification. So whether it is the introduction of video gaming as a way to understand something, the idea of playing games, a way to experience a futures world or scenarios to understand how something works. I know I've read that more field operations, being there, touching things. I myself am a kinesthetic learner. If I got a new computer program, a new video game, if I learn a new skill, do not give me the instructions. I will not read them. I will probably barely look at the video, but if I'm able to touch it and use it and kind of play around with it, that's my best chance of learning. So can you tell me maybe a little bit about how games are possibly changing the future of education and who's maybe using it?
Sure. So the easy answer for who's using it, really, I feel just about anybody within the education system at some point comes across an educational game. Now, there's a difference here, right, between talking about a game designed for education, so educational software, and doing something like gamifying learning, right? So, I could take a video game, we could put educational content in it, and it's interesting. And, we've seen that through iPads. We've seen that happen a lot in things like early elementary.
We had it, right? I mean, this was something
everybody had.
80s and 90s, whether it's, the
Oregon Trail,
right? Perfect.
Yeah. But I think there's another level to this, right? So it's not just, can I give you educational content in the form of a game? Can I gamify your education experience, right? Because, again, all of those inputs are the same inputs that drive you into a flow state in which you would want to engage in learning with reckless abandon, right? Can somebody become addicted to learning? I don't know. That's another knock-on question, But I think that if we were to do something like, take where I live, the city of Pittsburgh, they have an amazing education ecosystem, meaning that the public school system is in a very tight partnership with the out-of-school time network, which is also in a partnership with the workforce development portion of the city government and all the higher ed institutions and learning labs. So why couldn't I make it so that your education experience, your learning journey, instead of being just in a school where you sit and I sit in a period for 45 minutes and I get a grade, why can't that spill out into the city? And that my educational experiences in the out-of-school time network should be counted and made just as valid as my formal experience in school. And then can I layer a quest type game on top of it? Am I trying to level myself up? That's one of the, I think, most interesting applications for micro credentials. Those can act as my feedback and my points. And I acquire enough points, I can begin to level up in the very same way that I could gamify just a math lesson, right? So to me, I'd like to see your entire educational experience become gamified, right? And not just, hey, I'm going to play, the 2017 equivalent, I'm going to jump on and play Minecraft, right? That's awesome. But that, I think, is one small part of how we can create this really interesting educational experience for our kids.
Does that mean that working a summer job, on the beach, and learning about, I don't know, the tide ecosystem because you're a lifeguard, or maybe you learn about logistics working as an intern for UPS. Is this the token or gamification you're talking about, where you're able to go into whatever job you do or whatever you're learning and be able to stick that in your toolkit?
Totally. And so I think too that pushes on that general trend towards increased personalization. It pushes on what I would almost think of as that third horizon for competency-based education. It's completely doable now through technology. It's how can we string these all into one cogent learning journey, right? And not just, and it's a recognition of learning that happens everywhere. and you can prove mastery, right? So if you could learn about the tides of the ocean in a classroom setting and then apply that knowledge while on the job and show mastery in a wide variety of settings, hey, I'm on the beach, we're playing, I'm messing around with the ocean in some way, why can't I capture that and record it as a valid learning instance? And you can. It's just having it being counted as your formal, part of your formal education. That remains the question. So if we could gamify all of that and make it so that it put kind of the onus in the learner's hands, right? This is the game that you're playing. Go out and seek these experiences. Isn't that a little bit more interesting than just logging onto a computer and playing a game for one discrete lesson?
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
No, absolutely. So, we've been talking about, the personal pursuit of education, right? And that is decentralized. I can go and learn what I want to learn, and I have all these different media outlets and or games that I can use, right? The world is my learning oyster, which is a fascinating, interesting place. But one thing that world, excludes, or maybe we just haven't discussed it actually, is teachers. The teachers and the mentors that are going to allow this to happen. So what does that world look like? I mean, in this new personalized, decentralized world, how do teachers and mentors, the people who shape, education now, how will they continue to shape education going into the future?
Yeah, so that the human capital question is a really pressing question, right? So let's just look at CBE now, right? And I have a classroom that is based on
CBE.
Competency-based education.
Okay.
So we're going for mastery of content at your own pace rather than just seat time. So there's a whole level of training and coaching for existing teachers that has to come into play so that they can personalize that classroom. If you just think of from a classroom management perspective, that's a tough sell, right? Everybody learns at a different pace. So I think there's a couple of interesting things out there that can address that. So the self-organized learning environments are very much that pace, right? So they're self-organized. So you're still in a classroom setting, you still have a teacher, but they're self-organized in that the class is asked what they find interesting, right? So what's pressing? What are you interested in? Maybe what's a problem you're seeking to solve? And then from there, I can begin to channel that interest to different levels and different competencies that are rooted to standards. So that interest acts as kind of my bridge into knocking out standard curriculum, right? And that allows the teacher some relative autonomy in working with students because it's self-organized. You're learning at your own pace. So that if I'm rocketing ahead and you need some help, the teacher can go help you as I rocket ahead, right? And then when it comes time for me to step up, maybe I go on to the next classroom while you're still working with that teacher. But I think that on the whole, if we're looking at kind of questions around human capital, we need to really begin to diversify and expand educator roles. So it's not just, hey, teacher, you need to get all this extra training. Teachers, they're responsible for a lot. It's not just teaching. We ask so much of our teachers now that to go, okay, now you need all these other competencies on top of it, if anything, because of emerging tech in the classroom, not even just new organizational models. I think that's a shame. We shouldn't do that. How can we continue to pile more responsibility on teachers? Instead, we should go, how can we, again, diversify? How can we expand this role? So you could do what you do best as a teacher. But when it comes to the everything else piece, there's other people that can do that, because right now you enter into the profession of education and you're pretty much on two tracks, right? Teacher or administrator. That's crazy, right? We need teachers that know design thinking, or rather educators. We need educators that know things like big data. We played around in this space a little bit a few years ago and released an educator roles forecast. So it was 7 roles that would be needed as part of this expanded learning ecosystem. And it wasn't to layer things or to supplant a teacher, but it's to how can we lift teachers up in the act of teaching and get you back down to that one thing that you're best at, while at the same time bringing in the new and emergent skills that we need as part of that ecosystem. And that ranged everything from like a data steward, so somebody that would be a third party person. So it wouldn't rest within a school system. It wouldn't rest within like an ed tech company, but a neutral third party that understood student data from the inside out and knew how to look for patterns and really begin to leverage that data rather than just having it locked away or using data like somewhat punitively. We would look at just folks that would act as almost learning cartographers, right? So going out into the city and looking at what kind of education resources are there that people might not know about. So we really began to think critically about the other roles that would need to come alongside of a teacher, not necessarily throwing more things at the teacher now. So yeah, the human capital question is really, really an interesting one. And in nearly every workshop I've done, that comes up, and it's usually the big insight. And it's oh man, right? So we get these teachers that are coming out of either Teach for America, or they're coming out of pre-certification program, in terms of college. But we have to put up this really long induction process. We need to train them for how our school or our district operates. And that training gets even tougher the more personalized, the more specialized that school is, right? So one of the big like light bulb moments was, hold on, if we're going to personalize learning for our students, we need to personalize training for our teachers based on our resources, the needs, interests, and goals of our learners and our community. And it's really cool to see. So it's interesting to see that that's being recognized, at the professional level, at the human capital level, and they're really beginning to take, the education system's beginning to take real steps in that direction.
That's such an important part of the process. I know teaching is it's a thankless profession sometimes, depending on where you're located on Earth. But I'm glad to see there are people like yourself that are putting the critical thinking hat on and seeing how we can make their lives that much better. I wanted to ask you about an idea that I was kicking around in, and we've been kind of touching a little bit on it, right? On the the future of work and how it's going to impact society at large. And one thing that we're always talking about, we're always hearing in the age of artificial intelligence is that automation and AI programs are going to gobble up the not only the blue collar work, taken by robots, but also the white collar work, because when you could embed an AI program into any industry, eventually that will go ahead and gobble up some of those jobs that are available. And Jeremy Rifkin has been writing on this for 20 plus years, and people have been scratching their heads on it for ever since the introduction of the industrial machines of the industrial age. So this is both I think something to be warned about and to be fearful of, but it's also we've kind of dealt with this before. But it seems more and more that AI is becoming embedded, and it's something that we should discuss. One thing that we've been speaking on the podcast is the idea of a UBI, Universal Basic Income, which will be a sort of a baseline amount of money that you'll receive. And so instead of social programs, everybody receives a baseline. And in the era of abundance that Peter Diamandis may say, it'll be a chance for everybody to be a great equalizer, to be able to have this happen. One of my ideas that I had when we were having this conversation, though, about UBI is, what if there was UBI embedded everywhere for everyone, and where you could have UBI, you could be given a UBI, and then have the ability to learn whatever you want, so that there's no reason for you to go and choose to work like myself, work in the technology servicing industry, or you being a futurist for a teaching think tank, if you will. You have the ability, because you have a UBI, to maybe I could go be a scientist. Maybe I could learn how to be a concert clarinetist. Maybe I could do a completely new thing that I didn't realize. And kind of, instead of being forced to take on a job, you have a kind of an open space to learn and maybe figure out what your real skill set may be. Is this something that you've pontificated on yourself a little bit as we kind of talk about this possible era of UBI, and how is the future of education even prepared for dealing with a whole planet Earth, of people choosing to learn at any time and be able to ingest, as much information as they can?
Yeah, so the UBI question I think is really interesting as it relates to school. I think that it would give you so much freedom as a learner to really seriously cultivate a strong aspirational vision for yourself and to do so via experience, because I'm no longer beholden to finding a job where I can meet my debt payments, right? So that financial freedom, I think, could do a lot of really interesting things into things like career satisfaction, things like social impact, right? I think we would see a lot of interesting passion-based projects that would pop up out of nowhere because you would have the relative freedom to pursue those things. But in terms of directly applying that to education, that gets really interesting. I think that would cause havoc, at least in the short run, at the levels of higher ed. The people that have a business model and making you more workplace competitive, right? So I think that at the higher ed level, we would see almost a contraction, so that you would only see kind of those name brand institutions exist. I'm going to go to Harvard and get into a long tail degree. I'm going to either become a doctor or a lawyer or a researcher. Whereas if I had a UBI, all those other institutions, like, I would be dipping my toes in constantly, right? Because I don't have to work for a living anymore. It's that novelty of experience, I think, is what folks would chase. I think we would also see a proliferation of things like nano degrees and certifications, because you could jump in and out of those with relative ease. You could probably pay for them straight up, right, at that point, if I had a UBI and maybe worked occasionally. So I think that we would see something like that play out, but I'm not sure. I mean, the alternative too could just be to make higher education free, right? Like instead of a UBI, and then we would see what would happen with that. But, I don't think it would necessarily accelerate learning. Again, we've got to divorce the act of learning from formalized education, right? Because I could Google anything I want anytime I want. I have the world's information. I walk around with it in my pocket. So I can pretty much learn till I can't learn anymore. So I don't think it would cause somebody to learn more. That option's already available to us now. But I think that it would allow me to try more. It would give me the opportunity to really fall in love with the pursuit. It would allow, I think, folks that were interested in pursuits that were more oriented to social good to flourish. So yeah, I think that you would have a better idea of what you wanted before you jumped into the higher education pool, potentially.
Right. Well, thanks so much, Jason. I really appreciate you taking your time to jump on the SomeFuture podcast, and we look forward to hearing more about the future education from you.
Absolutely. Hey, it's my pleasure.